Welcome, everyone, on this 5th day of October 2017. This is the MMA Beat. I am your host for today's proceedings. My name is Luke Thomas. Thank you so much for joining me. To my left, I'm not sure what we call this panel. I don't think we've ever had this combo before.
A-plus team.
More like the F team, but we'll call it A-plus just in case. As you know, I'm Luke Thomas, SiriusXM, MMA Fighting. To my left, Jeff Wagenheim of the Washington Post. At the very end, Danny Segura, who is, of course, of MMAfighting.com as well. By the way, don't want to forget, boys, this episode of the MMA Beat is sponsored by Toyo Tires. I want to thank the good folks at Toyo Tires for, doing what they do. Okay, very good. I've been away, been in your homeland.
Yeah. How was it?
I got sunburned terribly. I blame you.
Okay.
But there's a lot to get to, actually. I actually watched the other beat while I was on vacation. You all did an admirable job in my absence. But I'm back to carry the deadlift.
It was tough.
You somehow soldiered on.
Yeah.
And by the way, Ariel, of course, is in Las Vegas. Where is Chuck? Do we know where Chuck is?
Chuck had some kind of family stuff he's got to deal with his kids, going to schools or something like that. His kids were in school, you know.
Oh, okay.
Getting smarter than him.
This is a terrible, that's not saying a whole lot. I texted him yesterday. I was like, are you coming to the beat? He said, no. I just wrote in all caps, dead to me. He said he was sorry. But there is still a lot to get to, of course.
Yeah.
Now, there was, of course, that incredibly tragic incident in Las Vegas. I want to put that for a brief comment at the very end. There is, in fact, MMA to talk about. And I think maybe I speak for some of our viewers and listeners when I say it would be nice if we could just for a moment put those tragic events on the back burner, at least mentally. Not, obviously they're of significant importance, but for the time being, let's talk about some fights. UFC 216 is going to be on Saturday. I'm very much looking forward to this, in part because I've been away. I have recharged the batteries. But the other part is because whatever else you make about the card, there are a couple of interesting things happening on it that are worth examining. I think one of the most interesting ones is Demetrius Johnson is going to be fighting Ray Borg, defending his flyweight title, in hopes of obtaining the 11th consecutive title defense in the UFC, which of course would be the record, breaking Anderson Silva's 10, or his and Anderson Silva's, I guess, 10 consecutive defense streak. But here's the interesting thing, gents. Not a lot of attention around it. Now, is it because of the Las Vegas shooting? Perhaps. Is it because we have spent so much time on this show talking about Demetrius Johnson's popularity in all ways good and bad that maybe it's not even worth examining anymore? But I don't believe that, Jeff. I actually think it is. Why isn't there a ton of discussion around what is truly, look, you can debate the significance of it, but it's not an insignificant event.
Yeah, I think it's a really significant event. But look, even before the horrible events in Vegas, this was a fight that was under the radar. It was,
Not like this, though, right?
Well, but it immediately got bumped down to, or was added to this card and was never elevated to the main event. So the UFC, that just tells you what the UFC is thinking. The UFC is thinking that this other fight, Tony Ferguson, Kevin Lee, that is the fight they're trying to sell. That's the fight that they think is going to sell. I mean, this has been an issue for the UFC ever since Demetrius Johnson has been the flyweight champion, really. Back when he won the title, the night that he won the title, there was a lot of boos in the crowd in Toronto. I remember that very well. I was there. And I remember afterward, Dana White sort of ripped into the fans and said, if you guys can't appreciate what this guy does, then I don't even want you to buy our pay-per-views anymore. And he really, kind of defended DJ and kind of said, this guy's amazing. Why are you not embracing him? Well, now, more recently, he's had a little bit of a beef with DJ because he was trying to set up this TJ Dillashaw fight, and DJ wanted to fight the next guy at flyweight. So it's kind of like two layers of DJ getting pushed down to the bottom. The fans have really never embraced him certainly the way I think they ought to. Not that anybody is obligated to embrace a fighter, but certainly where I think he warrants a lot more attention than he gets. And then on top of that, you've got the company, or at least the head of the company, who is not really on his side right now. So I guess that sort of doubly pushes him down.
Danny?
Yeah, I feel like the UFC hasn't really promoted this fight. I mean, they did for UFC 215, but here for UFC 216,
they didn't rebound, did they?
They weren't. They're not putting out there. Look, this guy's about to break the record. You need to tune in. We're maybe witnessing something that might not be broken ever, or it's going to take a long time to break. I don't feel like that's being promoted. And one of the reasons, and I know people are going to hate on this, but it all comes back to Conor McGregor. The main fight is linked to Conor McGregor.
How long did it take for us to get to Conor McGregor? 4 minutes.
Wow. And 30 seconds. Yeah.
Let's just talk about Conor for the rest of the hour now.
The main event fight is linked to Conor McGregor. The winner there could fight Conor McGregor next. I mean, a lot of people are talking about Nate Diaz maybe jumping in and fighting Conor McGregor. But look, if Kevin Lee wins, or even Tony Ferguson, and says something bold and wins in a spectacular way, that fight could possibly be the next fight. So, people are looking at after that. And because that could be a money fight, the promotion's also looking at that and also investing, the promotion side on that fight. So DJ just sort of feels like at this point, yes, he's co-main event. Yes, it's still a title fight, but it's not being talked about. And I would, obviously there's a bunch of reasons why, but I would attribute that just because the main fight is linked to Conor McGregor.
Let me throw out a reason, because I don't really, and I'm going to be clear about this. I do not know what the right answer is. There's costs and benefits to every decision you make. But if you're scheduled to fight at X event, and then for reasons, for whatever it may happen, the fight doesn't go through, and now you fight at X+1. So in this case, 215, now 216. The turnaround is so quick, the media has nothing new to ask you. There's nothing new to promote. It's the old stories. You're just baking it longer. And as a consequence, it just kind of falls flat. Maybe, Jeff, is the right answer saying if a fight falls through at, let's say, UFC 215, maybe you wait until UFC 218, 219. You give it new life, even though that might be a short-term inconvenience, it's a long-term benefit.
Yeah, I certainly see your point there. I'm thinking back to some other fights that have had similar things happen, and the one that comes to mind is certainly the John Jones and Daniel Cormier. That when the first time they were going to fight, and then they got bumped back, and I don't remember exactly how long it took before they actually did get together, but I do remember that in that second waiting time, there was much less buzz. I mean, of course, the first time they were scheduled to fight, they had that brawl, and so the people were really excited. And then when that didn't happen, it seemed as though it got a little pushed down a little bit. So I can understand what you're saying. I think there are a multitude of reasons why DJ is kind of not under the spotlight in the way he could. I mean, I think he's also a victim of his own dominance. I mean, he's gone out there. And really, we talk about cleaning out divisions. He's the one guy who certainly could say that he has. And nothing against Ray Borg, but Ray Borg is probably not the second best or third best guy in that division. But it just so happens that Demetrius Johnson has fairly recently beaten both of those guys. And Borg is, the next guy in line who hasn't already had his chance. And so it's a little bit more difficult, I think, for people to get excited. I mean, if this were the first time he was fighting Cejudo, and we just had seen how he performed, it would be something else. If he had never fought Benavidez, and we see the way he performs, those would be, I think, more widely considered credible threats to DJ. I think that there's just, I don't even know what the odds are, but I think there's something like 7 or 8 to 1 or something pretty big. And so, I think that's part of it. Is that, it's a history-making event, but we want to see something where it's a threat.
What about that rebound idea, though, right? I mean, because, look, the fight game is about waiting. It's about anticipation. And if you don't have any, or at least not much, kind of kills it off.
Yeah, it does. And I think you bring an interesting point. You could literally grab one of those UFC 215 interviews and just change the 5, add the 6.
And nothing changes.
And it's basically the same storyline, and everything is relevant. Everything would make sense. The questions that were asked to DJ and Borg leading up to a fight are pretty much the same questions that, are being asked, to be honest, this whole week. So I do think, obviously, there is some truth to that. But you got to look at it as well as, what are these fighters doing to promote it? I mean, you see Kevin Lee, even with his crazy attire, coming out there, bringing new things, Tony Ferguson as well. They are extending this fight. But what is Demetrius Johnson doing extra? What is Ray Borg doing extra to hype up this fight? Not much. It almost seems like the same answer. So maybe it is. It should.
That's interesting. So you believe that that DJ is either willfully or maybe not willfully, but somehow not really pushing it himself.
Maybe he's not really pushing it, but the questions that he's being asked are really the same questions that he was asked just 2 weeks ago. So. I think obviously DJ does have a degree of fault because, he can do things to hype things up. But if it's not in his nature, you can't really hold him accountable for it.
Yeah, DJ is DJ. He is the man he is. And I appreciate a person not trying to create some false narrative. And I don't think it would be necessarily it's not up to him to tout the history-making aspect of this. I think that if there was some beef between him and his opponent, that's one thing. But the history, really, that's up to the promotion. That's a UFC thing. They should be, talking about the dominance of Anderson Silva and what that meant.
Okay,
and how this guy's
have
going to pass it.
So did they rebound after UFC 215?
I would say not. I mean, look at. I don't think they really even pushed it as much as they could have for 215.
Right.
So, and then beyond that, it just got shoved underneath the other fight, an interim title fight, no less. And I know last week on this show I was like, well, I don't really care when these guys fight, as long as the right matches are made. That's all I care about. But the other side of that coin is that this is a guy who's about to make history, and he's kind of being subdued about it.
It's really an interesting moment. I did see a quote. Now I don't know if it's fake news, so if it is, please forgive me. I follow this guy on Instagram. He's his name is Johnny Candido. He's a power lifter. Anyway, no one cares about that. But he put up a quote from Manu Ginobili, the Argentine who plays for the San Antonio Spurs. And what he said was, according to Ginobili was like, look, everyone sort of worries about legacy. He's like, I got news for you. Everyone thinks you'll be remembered a certain way. You really won't. You just won't really remember. After 20 years, people are just going to forget about you. So your only preoccupation as an athlete should be to go and just work, and your only occupation as a fan should be to appreciate them while they're there. So let's sort of close the book on DJ for just a second here, because I don't want to spend every waking hour of the MMA Beat. Why isn't DJ more popular? But I guess I'll say to you, Danny, is Ginobili right, or is this sense about, are we really missing the boat here by so hyper-focusing on the business aspect around DJ, when really, look, if you catch it, great. If you don't. He's going to do his job, and we can do ours.
I can partially agree with that. I mean, at the end of the day, we're going to witness probably the best fighter on the planet, go out there and do his thing, come Saturday night. So we should really maybe just stop focusing so much about, is he selling, why not, and just enjoy DJ, about who he is, and stop worrying about, hey, he should fight this hype up. Let's just worry about what he does, and that's fighting. But in prize fighting, it's a little bit different than other sports. What you talk is also correlated to how much you make. So often we talk about DJ perhaps not being respected too much as a champion. And that's consequence partially from his talk as well. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we're gonna experience on Saturday night the highest level of MMA, and that's watching DJ do his thing.
Yeah, and I think that's the bottom line. I mean, to your point, I think in all sports it's true that there are certain athletes who supersede what you're talking about. Certain athletes do have a legacy that we'll always remember. If you're a football fan, you could be a young football fan. You probably either know or should know who Jim Brown was. You should know who Joe Montana.
Johnny Unitas. All I know about Johnny Unitas.
Yeah, but you know there's a legacy there. In basketball there are certain athletes, but for the most part there are a lot of great performers in all these sports who we can only appreciate while they're out there competing. And maybe DJ is one of those guys who is going to be the guy in the moment who we can appreciate. And I would just encourage fans, if you're not sure, you never quite attach yourself to, watch this guy fight. I mean, the guy is a phenomenal athlete. And as I've said before, and I've even written this in stories about him, sometimes I have to watch his fights in slow motion. I have to actually, when I'm DVRing it, I go back and I watch a segment of it, like maybe a 30-second piece of it in slow motion, just to try to understand what it is he's doing out there, because the guy is so fast and so precise, it's kind of mind-boggling.
I would also like to add, though, that, we remember, sure, like, we don't remember every single athlete out there, but we do remember some. I'm sure, down the line when LeBron James retired, people remember him. Obviously, people know Michael Jordan. DJ, you can make the case that DJ could be one of those guys. DJ is really the best in MMA. I think he's the pound-for-pound king. And it's unfortunate that, he's not that popular and he's not being appreciated. So I would sort of like to add that, that perhaps, he'll go on to do great things, be one of the greatest fighters ever. And
so last thing about this,
remembered.
Let's say he beats Borg, which, by the way, don't want to count out Borg. Borg could, MMA is insane. Yeah. Borg could do incredible things. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, last question on this. Let's say DJ beats Borg in a relatively similar fashion to the way he beat, let's say, Cejudo or Hayes, in a dominant way, stoppage kind of way. Does this performance on Saturday markedly change things? Because the way it's flying under the radar, given the fairly, incontestable invisibility about Ray Borg, I don't think that it does. He's going to break a record that very few people are going to bear witness to or ever recall.
Well, I think that it changes the narrative in this way. Once DJ has the record he's been chasing, I don't know how much he needs to then extend it. You know, once he is the guy who has the most title defenses in UFC history, once he has that, he owns the record. He doesn't need to keep building upon that. So therefore, he can then start taking those fights that Dana White was trying to foist upon him. You know, he can fight a TJ or Cody Garbrandt, or even a rematch with Dominic Cruz. I mean, that's the one sort of holy grail for DJ. I mean, that's a guy that he competed against and didn't beat. That would be something to see. So once he starts fighting those guys who are outside of his weight class and people that everybody knows and people perceive as not just a threat but a really serious threat to him, and if he can go out there and defeat those people, that just elevates him in a way that I don't think beating anybody at flyweight can do.
All right, so let's move along now. Someone said this to me yesterday on my live chat. I said they asked me this question, and at first I certainly didn't dismiss it. I spent the time to answer it, but I got to thinking about it a lot. And then I saw yesterday's media day, and it even raised the question more in my mind, especially when you consider the backdrop of the question, what kind of business is UFC 216 going to do? Now, again, hard to say exactly how much the terrible incident in the shooting is going to affect it, but even if that had never taken place, there would still be a pretty significant question about what kind of business it would do given the star power on it. Here's my point. Is Kevin Lee really as marketable as the MMA media makes him out to be? Now, here I am, a member of the MMA media, asking two other members of the MMA media. I mean, you want to talk about, a masturbatory session here. Yeah. This is terrible. Terrible for getting an outside perspective. But here's my point. Someone asked me, like, is he really all that marketable? And I thought to myself, well, sure, we love talking to him. I like sticking a microphone in his face and just letting him go because he'll say crazy things and he'll show up dressed in all salmon Adidas suit. And now he's telling Conor McGregor, I'm going to let you prove it to me that he does these outrageous things. And I think they work for the MMA media. But is it just our own fascination or has that caught on, Danny, with the larger public?
I feel like it has a little bit, and I want to give this example. When Kevin Lee called out Khabib Nurmagomedov a while ago, and he said that was a real fight that needed to happen, a lot of people were saying, is this guy crazy? Like, Khabib Nurmagomedov is way up there, Kevin Lee is way down here. But I disagree with that. He's just... By just creating that conversation that people are saying, wow, this guy's crazy, and they're naming Khabib Nurmagomedov and Kevin Lee in the same sentence, you're already putting them in that category, and he's certainly inserted himself. He's getting a title shot, this Saturday. I think we might be witnessing a star in the making here. If he were to, beat Tony Ferguson, which I think he's one of the best lightweights, in the world, in impressive fashion, or just beat him and then get on the mic and make something, get a bold statement going on and call out Conor McGregor, I think we could witness a money fight right there. And then, then the Diaz fight becomes a money fight. Maybe not as big as the Diaz fight, but you can definitely promote it into a big fight because we talk about any McGregor fight is big, sure, but I think this one could get a little bit extra because people are now tuning into Kevin Lee. What does he have to say about Conor McGregor? How do those two interact? A lot of the Diaz McGregor aura was how does this Nate Diaz character interact with Conor McGregor, this Irish man? And I feel like we'll get the same in a different version with Kevin Lee.
Are we having our own little fascination with Kevin Lee, or just something more to it?
Well, I think we've got this guy Conor McGregor out there, and we look for other people who can maybe duplicate some of those things. And Kevin Lee is a talker. He's a pretty eloquent talker, and that's to his credit. There are not that many people in the sport who can do that and also fight. So that right there, so he has some of the ingredients. He's also a really good fighter. So he has a lot of the ingredients, but we have to still, we still need the chef who can put it all together, and he needs to go out there and prove it in the toughest fight he's ever had on Saturday night. That would help him. However, I still think that he's short one absolutely essential ingredient, and that is he doesn't have that kind of base following like Conor McGregor has a nation that follows him. Mm-hmm. You think about him, and then you think about some of the Brazilian fighters who the fandom down there in Brazil is so rabid for their guys that a guy who can be a successful fighter in Brazil is going to have the entire nation behind him. McGregor, all of Ireland. You get like Nate Diaz, he doesn't have the nation, but there's a whole like culture, a sort of a subculture that appreciates the
rebellious streak.
Yeah, that rebelliousness really, you know, it kind of also you could maybe attach like a Donald Cerrone kind of thing. You know, those kinds of guys, they really reach out and grab a hold of an audience, and if they're winning, you know, and Cerrone's been sort of, you know, winning some, but also some of those key matches hasn't quite come through. Nate, you know, he's not won, he's lost 4 of his last 7, but he still is a star because of the way people perceive him. But then you got a guy like McGregor who's, you know, Ireland is it's not just Ireland anymore, but because of the rabid Irish fans, now that's kind of built into a bigger and bigger and bigger fan base. And Kevin Lee doesn't have that upon which to build. So that, I think, would be a major difficulty in him becoming, you know, that kind of mega star. I mean, he certainly can be a big star in the sport, bigger than a lot of other guys because of the way he can talk, and if he can back it up in the cage, great. But there is still that extra piece that he needs.
Kevin Lee, I think, has some of the ingredients to be a star. Look, let's be clear about this. He's not a star. Not as we speak today. UFC 216 is not going to do good business. It's just not. And again, for a host of reasons, but it's not like Tony and Kevin, as excellent as a fighter as they both are, and as incredible and as important, frankly, as that match is, interim title or not, it's not going to elevate it from a business standpoint. But here's 2 things I would say about Kevin Lee. One, he has told me explicitly, he's the guy to capture the African-American market, which has been a somewhat elusive for the UFC and MMA generally. He thinks he knows exactly what needs to be said. He thinks he is exactly who the person needs to be to capture that. You spoke about getting a larger public. He thinks he's that guy. That remains to be seen. Right. But here's the interesting thing about Kevin Lee. Kevin Lee pisses everybody off. Not me or you necessarily, right. But I mean, there are so many. You look at the videos, all the downvotes, oh my God, we hate Kevin Lee, all the negative comments. You get the tweets too. Who's this guy think he is? I'm like, something is resonating. And if you say crazy things like that and win, and winning is so critical because so many guys say crazy things and then lose. And so everything just gets deflated. Conor McGregor had a very, very different way of saying brash things, his own style and flair and everything. But in a roundabout way, Kevin Lee is like, he's got a little bit of the Josh Koscheck, everyone hates you vibe with that, you know, hip-hop flair, frankly, that Conor has. Right. And if he can win on Saturday, I don't think he all of a sudden is a star, Danny, but he's on his way.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, for sure. And we look back, for example, when Amanda Nunes fought Ronda Rousey. A lot of people thought, well, if Amanda Nunes beats Ronda Rousey, all of a sudden she becomes a star.
The win itself is not enough.
But
not always. Right.
Yeah, the win itself is not enough. And we saw that. I mean, Amanda Nunes, you know, is a fantastic fighter, but if you look at her Twitter following, she's got like 100K. Followers. So, I mean, you know, that's a sign of her popularity. But Kevin Lee, you know, he's being promoted by the UFC. He's all the time, at the UFC PR thing, you know, doing media.
Hold on. Let me stop you there. Sure. Let me stop you there because I think you're right. He is being promoted. If they do breakfasts and lunches, he shows up there. He came to Radio Row in Las Vegas. I interviewed him there as well. He made I think he was on Ariel's show as well. He did all the rounds and everything. So he definitely takes advantage of that. But this is, to me, the key question, which is why I mentioned the African-American thing. I don't know if that's going to work for him or not. But how is a star made? It's a very important question. How was one made? On the one hand, yes, they have to be a good fighter, or at least someone that someone wants to see, ostensibly a good fighter. They have to be promoted to some extent by their promoter, yes. Mm-hmm. But to really capture that next level, to really go there, I tried to explain this yesterday, you have to do something that makes someone like Jeff or Danny or Chuck or Ariel want to know more, want to get around and tell their audiences about you. And Kevin Lee kind of does that a little bit. I don't know if enough to reach superstardom, but in asking the question about how is a star made, a lot of it is just rolling up the sleeves and elbow grease, which Kevin Lee is more than willing to do.
Yeah, I agree, but, you know, we heard the term the stars are in our eyes. I mean, the stars in the sports world are in the eyes of that fan base. And if Kevin Lee is claiming, and I think it's really interesting you say this, that if he's saying that I'm the guy that can resonate with the African-American community, that's really interesting because, you know, he's certainly not the first African-American top guy in the sport. I mean, the guy who was considered the pound for pound greatest ever, John Jones, until he went away. African American, we got some other champions. I mean, Daniel Cormier. You could name
Rampage,
a lot of guys over through history who, but has any one of them really resonated with the black community?
Tyron Woodley as well.
There's a guy. I mean, I think there are some athletes who, potentially could, and I don't know what it is about what he thinks that he has that they don't, that would make him the exception. But that's the missing ingredient. And if he can do that, and again, I don't know whether the UFC we're talking about earlier about the UFC trying to promote Demetrius. Well, how is the UFC trying to promote this guy within the community he's trying to reach? I mean, it's one thing if he comes to Radio Row and he's just talking to like regular old MMA fans. It's a fairly white fan base for the most part. Well, how do you reach beyond that?
It's a little more than fairly, but yes, to your
well,
point,
okay, yeah, but I'm trying to be kind here.
But
how do you reach beyond that? Where do you?
He seems to think he knows. He seems to think he knows.
But it's not just him. It's got to be the promotion. The promoters have to be able to put him in front of the people that he needs to reach.
But like, how would you promote to the Irish before Conor McGregor? Did they really know? They had Jason Tan. They didn't really know what they were doing.
Well, he was
a guy.
He was built.
And forget it. Could be African American. Could be women. Could be swimmers. Could be whoever. If you're trying to reach an audience, sometimes you need that one leader at the front who actually shows you what the path is. Yeah. If Kevin Lee is who he says he is, and he has yet to prove that, but if he is, he will lead away, will he not?
Conor McGregor, the UFC wasn't like, we need to reach the Irish market. Let's see how this happens. Conor McGregor kind of just came in and then did his own thing, and then it made it easy for the UFC to reach that market. Is Kevin Lee that guy to reach the African American market? Maybe. But I definitely see ingredients and see things that make me believe he's a star in the making. Just a little simple thing. When Conor McGregor was in the come up, everybody was talking about him. Like all the headlines for like a good while where this fighter says this about Conor McGregor. We're not seeing exactly the same thing with Kevin Lee, but to a lesser degree we are. We see Ala Quinta coming out and talking about Kevin Lee. We see Mickey Gall coming and challenging Kevin Lee to a gym fight. We see other fighters paying attention to Kevin Lee. So I do think he'll probably not become a star as big as Conor McGregor. I think we agree with that. Conor McGregor is just something special, but I think he can become a star in the UFC, especially if he comes in and gets that victory on Saturday night over Tony Ferguson.
And well, speaking of stars, they're going to need someone like Kevin Lee or whoever else the next star is going to be, because it was revealed this week. I thought this was hilarious that Damon Martin was the guy who broke this. We love Damon Martin, and I salute to him for breaking the story that Fox and UFC in their exclusive negotiating period did not reach an agreement for a new television deal. Now, that is not in any way unexpected. Why would you reduce your own leverage when this is what we live in, a leverage world? That's what this is, especially in the entertainment business. So now that deal they signed in 2011 was a 7-year deal, ostensibly somewhere between 90 and 100 million annually. It was a 7-year deal, which means it's going to end in 2018. Now the UFC can go and talk to whoever else. They can talk to Amazon. They can talk to ESPN. They can talk to Facebook. Remember Facebook fights? They can do a lot of different things, and they can have a lot of different partners as well. Turner Sports has made a big pitch. As you know, they bought the rights to the Champions League going forward. Okay, I honestly think, Jeff, that this is perhaps the most, WME IMG has got to get this right. They have got to get this right. And I don't really mean how much money they get, but who you sign with and where you put all your content has significant, if not outright, the most meaningful impact of any decision you could make. When they signed with Fox, they found a place for The Ultimate Fighter and a reboot in how it was produced, all of their highlight shows. 34% of Fox Sports' content is UFC. 34%. Right? And then the show after The Ultimate Fighter where Karen Bryant talks to those donks, all that stuff. I forget what it's called. In any case, UFC Tonight, all this stuff. Plus, how many shows you give them, where those shows are, what times they are. Are they on Saturdays? Are they on Sundays? How your company is prioritized in the larger pantheon of all the things that you have. It is so critical. So let me ask you you would agree it's critical, yes?
Absolutely, sure.
Okay. What should happen for the UFC? What is an ideal scenario for them? And also, this leads into the oversaturation conversation. The number of shows affects everything. What should they do?
Well, I think that the UFC is with the new owners, I guess maybe we shouldn't call them new owners anymore. They've owned the company for over a year now.
Yeah.
But WME, IMG, what is their business? They're into entertainment. They're into getting their entertainers in front of the right people. And so this was, I'm sure this was part of their, a big part of their thinking, that when they were buying this company, saying, hey, this TV deal is going to be ending, and we can take it and do this, that, and the other thing with it. Now, what those things are, we don't know yet, but I'm gonna guess that they're going to be approaching a lot of different avenues. That this is not going to be like the Fox deal, where Fox basically was creating FS1, and they needed programming. They needed programming, and the UFC provided tons of it, and still does. Well, now it's so that symbiotic relationship was very important for the UFC and for Fox. But now the UFC is like, well, we could produce some things for Fox, but we also could produce some things for ESPN, and we can also go on to onto the pay stations, the HBO or the Showtime. We can also go to go online to Facebook or they've got Netflix. So many different possibilities, and I would be kind of surprised if they go with one of those things as opposed to creating a menu where they have, we do these things here, we do these things here, we do those things here. So I don't know that, I'm not sure whether they will, to your point, decrease the number of shows, but I think that there'll be something, they will recreate the look to some extent. Maybe they'll have fewer fight cards, maybe they'll have fewer fights on each fight night. Maybe they'll. So
as opposed to 12 fights, they'll have like 9 fights or something.
I don't know. I mean, I'm just guessing. Like what I think they should do is have fewer fights on a fight night, because really nobody needs to sit there for 6 hours. There's no other sporting events out there other than cricket where you're sitting there for an eternity watching the thing. So have fewer of those, and maybe have fewer pay-per-views and more things that are going onto Showtime or HBO or something, and have some things that are going on ESPN and different nights that are going on Fox. I mean, these guys can create that jigsaw puzzle and put it together, and that's what I imagine they're going to try to do.
Is the jigsaw the right answer?
I'm not sure what the right answer is here, but I think what they're going to be what they're going to be looking to do is reduce the number of shows, because they have to put on fights for Fox Sports. They do, and for FS they have to build the fight card, and people don't really realize how much the TV deal affects the company, because then
it affects roster size.
Yeah, it affects roster size. It affects promotion-wise, because now you got to promote so many events, and we've seen that. We've talked about it extensively. How it sometimes feels like the fights are not being promoted long enough. It just seems like we're going back to back-to-fights. So that could be an issue as well. And also, as you said, 34% of content, that's a lot of content they got to provide to FS1.
Keep in mind, just for clarification, that's live events, The Ultimate Fighter, Tough Talk, UFC Tonight, highlight shows.
Right. But all that is centered around fights.
Yes.
So I really do think they're going to try to lower down the amount of shows, because if you also look at the big business of the UFC is pay-per-views, right? And by putting a lot of fights for FS1, they're also taking away fights that, good fights that they could be putting on pay-per-view. So I'm not sure where exactly they're going to go, but I know I have a feeling they're going to be looking to reduce the amount of shows.
They have been playing with the number year over year. Sometimes it's one pay-per-view a month. There was a time when they did 14 in a year. There's been time when they did 11. Do you think, Danny, there's a time now in restructuring this TV deal, it has been suggested that what that might happen is that they might decide to lower the number of pay-per-views and put some of the more premium content on whatever these various television platforms you alluded to, or might be, Jeff, that way to get a bigger, ultimate guaranteed piece of the pie. You look at this weekend, look, everyone's complaining about the card, but I'm sorry, there are very good fights on it. It's just not a card that's going to sell on pay-per-view. Maybe you give something like that to an ESPN, which, by the way, has done great business with Top Rank. Manny Pacquiao and Lomachenko's going to fight on it. Is that a better answer?
Maybe. I don't really see the UFC going away from the pay-per-view model.
Not going away,
but
instead of doing
lowering
one a
it
month,
down.
something like single digits, 8 or 9 a year.
I don't know if that's the answer, because I feel like big pay-per-views, we always see title fights on the pay-per-views. It feels like, these big events, and it feels like the UFC really, cares about sort of the pay-per-view market and sort of running their business through that. I don't know if exactly changing it and actually putting up title fights and more important fights on actual, I guess, free content. I don't know if that's the answer, but I have a feeling they'll lower down the fight night cards. Because to be honest, we've seen some cards, like, for example,
that Japan card while I was gone.
That Japan
What
card?
is the difference between, what is the difference between that Japan card that I missed while I was gone and any World Series of Fighting card?
Not much.
Nothing except the production values.
Or what about it? The one with Stefan Struve and Volkov.
The one in Rotterdam.
Yeah, Rotterdam. I mean, some of these cards are looking to the point where Bellator goes head to head in the same weekend, and the Bellator card is more stacked. So I think I have a feeling the UFC fight nights, those are going to be lowered down as opposed to the pay-per-views.
I mean, I endorse the idea that you brought up of having fewer pay-per-views. I just don't think there are 12 or 13 pay-per-views that a fan wants to buy. I mean, it's a little bit difficult for us to talk about this because when the pay-per-view comes up and we're covering it, we get I get reimbursed by the place I'm writing about it.
And Danny just steals.
So exactly. So I don't feel the hurt. So if I buy this Saturday night's fight card, or I buy the the UFC fight at the Garden with Conor McGregor going to make history, those are two very different kinds of events.
Sure.
And yet, for me, it doesn't really make any difference because I'm getting reimbursed. But I think the typical fans, I just don't think that there's enough to sustain that. Now, so I agree with you that would be a prudent move. Whether it is the move that they make, it's hard to say. And I think a lot of it is going to be, they're going to put the money first. If they can decide they're going to make more money by using premium cable and spreading the rest of the stuff around on different outlets, that's what they're going to do. I think that they're going to look at some of these pay-per-views that are not big earners, and they're going to say, well, what can we do to make this better? And whatever that solution happens to be, they're going to go for. And I think it's hard for us to say what they're going to do, but I think that the fewer pay-per-views would be a good idea.
Okay, so let's wrap up on this idea then. What are they going to do? I know you say you're very reluctant, but let's actually here's what I want to point out. So you have Thursday Night Football that I think co-airs on Amazon. Now, are you an Amazon Prime member?
Yes.
Are you?
Yep.
Okay, well, Jeff Bezos has us by the balls, because I am as well. All right? And I really enjoy Amazon. And part of the reason why that works is that you don't have a giant audience with Amazon Prime. I think the first one that watched the NFL game was like a little over 300,000. But the idea is if you're watching on Amazon Prime and you see an ad for a jersey, you're on the Amazon website. You can just go right there, click and buy.
Let me buy those Reebok kits.
Right. Well, okay. But here's the thing that you mentioned about that. This is why I'm a little bit skeptical of the Amazon thing. I think Amazon would be a good fit for the UFC, but they like to control everything. If you want to buy some UFC products, yes, you can go on Amazon, but they want you to buy from the UFC store. They want to promote UFC Fight Pass. I think in the end, they're going to do what you suggested, Jeff. They're going to split it up, and how, I don't know. And I also think they're going to surprise us with some kind of digital integration outside of Fight Pass. I just don't know what that's going to be.
The one challenge that I see in all this, especially if they split it up amongst various outlets, but even if they don't split it up, I think that, the one thing they had Fox, basically, Fox needed that 34% of their program. They needed the UFC, and they were willing to say, okay, you guys can hang on to production. And UFC fights on Fox essentially are run by the UFC, really. I mean, and I'm not sure that's going to be the same case if they go over to ESPN. I don't think ESPN's going to say, yeah, sure, you guys bring your own guys on here and that's fine. Or if they go to Amazon, I think the production that other companies, that other media outlets are going to want to put on it, that's going to be the challenge, I think, for the UFC. And again, with the newish owners, maybe they'll be a little bit more willing than the Fertitta regime was
to hand over control.
To hand over control of the production, because the UFC has forever owned and operated the production of its fight cards, and they've got it down to a science, and they do very well with it. But it definitely is their thing, as opposed to, it's not. It doesn't look like a Fox production, other than that little, the intro music that sounds the same as it does on the NFL fights, the NFL games. Other than that little bit of music, everything else looks like a UFC production. And I think that once they go to the next level with new broadcast partners, I think it's going to be a little different.
All right, so that brings us to some of the interesting things that are happening with the UFC as this year winds down. We'll see where they end up in terms of their next television deal. God only knows. Here's what I do know. There's an amazing fight that just got booked. I am dying to talk about it. Frankie Edgar is going to challenge Max Holloway at UFC 218. 18. Correct? Yeah. December 2nd in Detroit, Michigan. All right, Juggalos, suit up. This is going to be quite a showdown. I have to say, Danny, I love this contest. I love everything about it, and I'll tell you one of the things I like about it most. One, I like that, he's only on a 2-fight win streak. He had the comeback win against Jeremy Stephens and then just beat the brakes off of Yair Rodriguez. But Frankie Edgar trying to become a guy who's a 2-weight world champion against Max Holloway. To me, this completely ascendant talent in the UFC got a new contract, by the way, which was interesting because that's keeping Stipe Miocic on ice, not Max Holloway. He's out there. He's getting busy. It's for a title, and I'll say this. The most intriguing part about that is that whatever happens with Kevin Lee and Tony Ferguson, I don't know. I think if either of those guys win, but in particular, if Max Holloway wins, they are still a part of the Conor McGregor sweepstakes. Everybody, I think the best fight you can make with Conor McGregor is Max Holloway at 155. I want to see it. What do you think?
Sure, yeah, that's always linked. Even Frankie Edgar, a lot of people were talking about, well, we want to see Frankie Edgar fight Conor McGregor for years. So even Frankie Edgar, I wouldn't rule out. Plus, he's fought at 155 before, was a champ there. So even Frankie Edgar, I wouldn't rule out with, having ties with Conor McGregor there, plus his teammate Eddie Alvarez. I mean, the story's there. But yeah, I think Guilherme Cruz mentioned something really interesting on Twitter. This fight, we all saw it coming. We knew it was going to make it, right? Max Holloway versus Frankie Edgar. But yet when it was announced, it wasn't a surprise to anyone, but it felt on Twitter was a big deal and everybody was tweeting about it and everybody was happy about it. Because it's a fight that's refreshing. It's a fight that's also, it's not number 13 challenging number 1 and number 7 challenging number 1. This is truly the best guys, at 145 pounds. So not only is it a great contest sports-wise, it merits the two fighters, but it's linked to the Conor McGregor. I don't think Conor McGregor will ever drop back down to 145. But look, we live in an age where money fights happen, and fighters seem to be more lenient and moving up in weight. We see it with Donald Cerrone, Masvidal, tons of fighters, are moving up and fighting at a healthier weight. So I think, in the featherweight division, either Frankie Edgar or Max Holloway picks up a victory, they're still somewhat linked to Conor McGregor.
I will disagree with one little part of what you said.
Snap!
I know where you said we knew this fight was going to happen. We knew this fight should happen, but the way things are operating in the UFC lately, you never know. You never know when you get
that's the fight that the UFC wanted.
These are the two best guys in that division. It should be the fight to happen, but every now and again we see the UFC veering off into something else. Oh, maybe we could put Holloway into something else, a bigger money fight. Now I think this is going to be a really good fight. I'm real excited for it. Frankie Edgar, I've loved watching the guy forever, and actually, what I just said, watching him forever, makes me think at some point, I'm waiting for him to kind of age out of the sport because he's been around for a while, but he's not an older guy. He's shown prime skills even as recently as the Rodriguez fight. He
looked great against Yair Rodriguez.
Fantastic. And you say that he's only on a 2-fight winning streak. Well, he just never can. He never could come to grips with Jose Aldo. But if you set aside that one guy who he just never could come to grips with, he would be on a really long streak of wins. On the other hand, the one guy who did come to grips with Jose Aldo, one of the two guys that did it, is Max Holloway. So it's a really great fight. I think it's a great test for Holloway. I mean, not to say that Aldo wasn't. Aldo was a great test for anybody. But now he comes back and he's got to fight this guy who's relentless in a whole different way. And I think it's going to be really fun to watch.
Jeff, if Frankie Edgar wins and becomes one of the, so there's how many two-weight world champions are there? BJ Penn, Randy Couture, Conor McGregor. Who am I missing? Anyone else? I believe that's it for two-weight world champions.
I think that's
maybe GSP.
Not yet.
If he beats
Yeah. So let's just see for now, right? So those are the three. You had your name. We're talking less than a handful of guys. That Frankie Edgar, I think he's going to go in the Hall of Fame, but we talked about legacy a little bit earlier. Does he become one of those guys that people just don't forget about if he wins against Max Holloway?
Maybe, but he's also not one of those, he's a little bit more Demetrius Johnson than he is, Conor McGregor. He doesn't talk very much. He just goes out there and performs in a brilliant way. I mean, think about how he became a champion in the first place. He didn't just beat anybody. He beat BJ Penn. I mean, this is
twice, 3 times.
Right. He beat him, and people didn't believe it. So he went back out there and beat him in the rematch. And then, of course, years later, he beat the ghost of BJ Penn. But really, the first 2 victories were pretty spectacular. I mean, I know that a lot of people didn't think he won the first one. I thought he did, actually. So, but bottom line, he got his belt from that guy. That's going to elevate him even further. If he can go out there and now win another belt, and then take one more step. We'll see what that next step is. Is it going to be back to 155 against McGregor, or is it going to be something else? It's going to be a big fight, regardless. We know that this fight is going to lead to something even bigger, and that's another part of what makes it exciting to watch.
I think he's gonna fall to be like a great fighter. He's gonna be remembered as a great fighter, very technical guy. But I don't know if necessarily just because he's a two-weight world champion, people are gonna start, putting him in the pound-for-pound list or in sort of the GOAT category.
Not
he does
GOAT, but dude, that's
it is, but I think
would you put
losses,
Couture in that? I mean, Couture is also
right.
That,
I think his
put
two
him in that
losses to
level.
Jose Aldo has somewhat tainted him because everybody has seen Jose Aldo and even today as he was the greatest featherweight of all time. He was 10 years unbeaten, whatever,
Right.
and he just couldn't get past the best guy. So I do really think that hurts him a little bit. Still though, becoming a two-weight world champion, defeating Max Holloway, who's a fantastic fighter. Of course, it'll add a cap to his feather, and he'll be remembered as one of the best. But I really think the two losses to Jose Aldo kind of
hurt him a little bit.
Then
that brings us to Max Holloway. Now, beating Frankie Edgar would, of course, be incredible. Yeah. One, because that was, maybe he wouldn't be a two-weight world champion, but he was a world champion in a weight class above. Right. You get a win over that guy, that's pretty incredible. And I have to say, I don't know where you guys stand on this. I firmly believe, I don't know that it's going to happen. Inshallah, I hope it does. But I think the best fight you can make with Conor McGregor, forget Nate Diaz, I like Nate, but forget Nate Diaz. Forget the winner of Tony and Kevin, and all those would be great fights. But the one, I think, there's something about the history that those two have, the weirdness of their first fight. Conor won it. Max is a completely different fighter, and Conor, frankly, people don't want to acknowledge this, Conor's a different fighter too. I am desperate, almost in a way, for Max to win. I have nothing against Frankie, but I think if Max does, I do believe his name will be circulated as part of that sweepstakes because, Jeff, he has outright stated, I'm featherweight champ, I'm going to be featherweight champ for a while, but the cuts are starting to get a little bit harder. He has already eyeballed a spot at 155. Am I being overly ambitious? Am I crazy about my affection for this fight?
Well, only in this way, and we've talked about this also in shows past. Conor McGregor is always about what that next hill is to climb, and he doesn't look over his shoulder. And so the people...
But he's acknowed, Max. He's acknowowed how good he is.
Well,
he's acknowledged the potential.
He does that. He does acknowledge these things, but when push comes to shove, he wasn't looking to go back in the cage with Aldo. He got rid of Aldo in 13 seconds, and he couldn't possibly do any better. Now, the one thing he could say is, well, Holloway's one guy that went the distance with him, so maybe he would give him a rematch. But I have a feeling that he's going to want to be pursuing bigger and better things. And once he has a victory over you, I don't know that he's going to turn around and say, well, I'll get 2 victories over you. I don't know that that's in his mindset. Maybe I'll be proven wrong, but I sort of see McGregor as moving forward, moving to bigger and better things, and that would be, maybe either staying, fighting somebody, I don't know, fighting money fights at lightweight, or even going up to a welterweight and trying to be a 3-weight champion.
I agree with you, Luke Thomas, in the sense that there is a story there. And Max Holloway says it. He was the 2015 featherweight champion. I'm the new champion because
right.
Conor McGregor keeps calling himself.
And he makes a comparison to the Warriors and Cavaliers. Yeah,
still the featherweight champion. Conor McGregor calls himself. But I think that's a storyline that's perhaps more fitted for down the line. I think a fight with Kevin Lee or Nate Diaz is more likely to happen than it is for Max Holloway. I can see Max Holloway defending his belt a couple of times more, and if Conor McGregor manages to defend his lightweight belt, maybe down the line in a year or two, I don't know, maybe then you can do, okay, well, this guy was always the champion at 145, and he left, but he got stripped from his belt. He never lost it to anyone, and here you got the real 145-pound champion. Now let's do a fight with the 2 belts. I think that's a fight more suited down the line, but I do agree with you that there's a storyline there.
I want to move along if we can because we are getting a little bit short on time. I'm going to jump to one topic. I hope I don't mess up the production donks in the back. Another fight that's happening the end of this year, I do believe it's the last fight card of the year, is the return of the natural-born killer. Carlos Condit is back. This one surprised me a little bit, I have to be honest. Okay, so we saw, that Condit, if you haven't gone back and watched Condit versus Lawler, take some time out to go back. It's hard to describe the insanity of that in retrospect. It is truly that 5th round. It's just one of the most chaotic, it's this maelstrom of fists and elbows and blood and sweat. It was ridiculous, okay? And coming out of that, Robbie Lawler gets waxed by Tyron Woodley. Coming out of that, not directly, but the next fight after that, Carlos Condit loses badly to Demian Maia. Now, you can say, okay, Tyron Woodley, the champ, Demian Maia, a guy who, beat everyone but the champ, basically. No big deal. But I also sort of wondered about the damage. But it turned out Robbie Lawler, with a camp change and a little time off, looked pretty good, I thought, against Donald Cerrone. Competitive fight, but Cerrone's good. Now you have Carlos Condit coming back. So, Jeff, I'll start with you on this one. Are you excited for the return of the natural-born killer? We know what he's done. Can he do it again?
I'm kind of a little on the fence on this one. This is one where I don't have a strong opinion. I like seeing him fight, and I don't think he's one of those guys who stepped away from the sport in a majorly damaged way. I think he stepped away from the sport looking at it as, well, I've had my opportunities to get back to the top, and I didn't quite get there, and almost resigned to be like a second tier. Second tier is not right, but a guy that's not going to be at the top of the mountain. And I think he stepped away for that reason. And now he's reinvigorated and he's ready to take another shot at it. So I kind of look at this as this is not like some other people who left the sport and are coming back, and I'm like, ooh, they want to cringe when I think about those guys taking more damage. This is not
like a BJ Penn.
Yeah. This is nowhere near that. But by the same token, when he comes back, I still need to see him go out and perform and look like Carlos Condit before I'll get real excited.
And he's taking on, I didn't say this, so let me make it clear. He's taking on Neil Magny.
Yeah. Right.
Is that a good fight for him?
I think so, and it's a fight that surprised me. I was thinking about, maybe he would go on to even challenge for a title, maybe RDA for a title eliminator bout. But yeah, this fight really surprised me, but in a way, I kind of like it. It's like a good introduction back into the welterweight division. And Neil Magny's no joke. He's a legit fighter. But I wouldn't say I'm on the fence like you guys with his return. We can all agree that fight with Robbie Lawler was brutal, and some of us were like, kind of feeling a little weird about them fighting again after that crazy bout. But something that I've always seen Condit as, and always regarded him as, a very smart fighter. If you look at his interviews, he's very aware about taking damage, about head trauma and all that, and that's one of the reasons why perhaps he didn't really come back too soon. So now that I see him excited to come back and he took some time off, I think if he really were to come back, it's not because of money, it's because he feels good, he feels he can do well. And, Neil Magny's not, although a great fighter, he's not a Robbie Lawler, he's not a Tyron Woodley, someone with like scary knockout power that you can, maybe feel a little iffy about his return. I think this is a great way to see where he's at. And I'm pretty optimistic about his return. I think he would be a great ingredient for the welterweight division and make things very exciting. I
share his, I don't know how you feel with this, Jeff. I share Danny's sentiments. I think Neil Magny's a very tough guy.
Yeah.
And he can hurt you. I mean, ask Hector Lombard. He can hurt you. But I think you're right. Jeff, do you agree? There's a lot of guys they could have put him up against. I feel like Neil Magny, I don't want to be any way to be disrespectful, because it's not true to say that Magny is a safe choice. That's not quite right. But he's not some bruising marauder that wouldn't tell you a whole lot. He'll give you a lot of different looks, and so you get a little bit more of a measurement, I think, of where Carlos Condit is.
I think, actually, for both these guys, I think you can also look at it from Magny's side. I mean, Magny's not done in this sport by any point. I mean, he's a guy that he's fallen down a little bit, but if he can go out there and take care of business against Carlos Condit, that's a huge, huge thing for him, and it gets him right back in the mix. So I think it's an appropriate. It's an appropriate matchup. I think that's I would commend the UFC matchmakers for making this fight.
I'm going to abbreviate this point just to make it so we can fit everything in on the clock here. The end of the year for the UFC, we were like, oh my God, no Cain Velasquez. Oh my God, no John Jones. Oh my God, Connor's not going to fight. And now you have Cyborg at home. Potentially that fight might be off. So there's a lot of things going wrong. But at the same time, I got to say, credit to the UFC. If you look at their schedule for the end of the year, 217, I mean, we know that joker is stacked. 218, Gaethje Alvarez. I mean, this is a guaranteed dogfight.
Yeah.
I think Ngannou Overeem is on that card, if I'm not mistaken, right? Or is it a different one? I cannot remember which one of the card that's on. End of the year. End of the year. Of course, we mentioned before, you have Edgar Holloway. I know I'm missing some other ones. Now you're going to have the return at 219. Natural Born Killer. You're going to have Dominic Cruz versus Jimmy Rivera, and we're just getting started.
Calvillo, Carlos Esparza, there is a red prospect.
There's another one. We're just getting. I'm barely talking about the full weight of the fight cards. Danny, is the UFC having a good end of the year?
I think the fight card, if you look at the fight card, there's only like 2 or 3 fights still at it. I'd like to see,
It's still in developmental.
Yeah, I'd like to see, the fight card get filled up a little more before I can, make a judgment on that. But I think so far they're on the right track. I mean, if you look at the fights they've booked, they're all good. They're all fights fans want to see. Fans want to see Dominic Cruz come back. Fans want to see a Carlos Condit fight, Ngannou over Reem. All these fights are fan-friendly fights that are going to attract a lot of views. So I do like the way they're heading, but I would like for them to fill out the rest of the card to see exactly.
But I think what I'm saying, Jeff, is in the absence of these like blockbuster contests or these fighters for one reason or another we can't get them, UFC's, in the famous words of Brock Lesnar, well, I mean, that's a little bit demeaning, but they're making something out of, I won't say nothing, but they're turning water into wine here a little bit.
Yeah, I agree that I don't know how any of these fight cards between now and the end of the year are going to do on pay-per-view, and that ultimately, is one of the ways in which we measure these things.
217 will do pretty good.
It might. It certainly has some of the credentials for it, but I'm looking at it from the other angle, which is, are these fights that I want to watch? And, that doesn't always, it seems like that's the same question. How's it going to do on pay-per-view? Are these fights you want to watch? Sometimes those questions are actually different, though. Sometimes there are fights there are fight cards that have a bunch of really interesting fight, doesn't have that one major, headliner on top that's going to blow you out of the water, but you've got a bunch of good fights. And I think all the fight cards between now and the end of the year have something there. There's always some ingredients, and I think that's the way the UFC has always operated. Sometimes they get away from it, but I think they've always operated with a lot of good matchups, and I think they're doing that between now and December.
Yeah. And if they can book Holm versus Cyborg, I think that's the fight to make, and it could easily main event a pay-per-view, and I think it'll do well. I mean, we saw Holm's ratings on Fox, and they're great, and Cyborg, she's regarded as one of the best fighters out there, female fighters. So.
Yeah, so 218 has the crown jewel, 217 already locked and loaded, 219 is not quite there yet. To your point, it has some intriguing things that tantalize you, but it doesn't quite have that bedrock piece embedded in it yet. We'll see ultimately if they can come to some agreement with Cyborg or somebody else. Let me spend the rest of the time we have here. We've talked nothing but UFC. Very quickly, Bellator has a card on Friday. We talk about this on my radio show nonstop. This is, it's getting no buzz. It's an excellent fight card. At the very top of it, by the way, you've got Darian Caldwell taking on Eduardo Dantas for the bantamweight title. The return of Pat Curran, who, by the way, gave up fighting full-time to now fight part-time because he has a full-time job as an HVAC tech, which I found very surprising. Steve Cozzolo's on this card, on the undercard. Daniel Strauss taking on Emmanuel. It's a great card, okay? And it's getting no buzz. The stuff that you hear about in the media is Chael Sonnen versus Chuck Liddell. Okay, let me be fully clear about this. I have an enormous amount of respect for Chael Sonnen, and obviously Chuck Liddell is one of the great fighters ever, okay? Certainly one of the most popular and intriguing figures in mixed martial arts history. I would rather get shot in the eyeballs with liquid Ebola than watch this contest. Is there nothing we can do? And I realized it kind of fell through, that the buzz is kind of, but the fact that he was even suggested and the fact that it's even possible, it raised all kinds of alarm bells for me.
I'm actually a little confused here because I actually thought that Chael was calling out Chuck Mindenhall, and I was thinking, Chuck's got a, he's actually in pretty good fight.
I saw that dome piece. He can take a shot.
Yeah, he can do it. No, but this is, which is the Bellator that we're going to be seeing.
What is their identity? I don't even know what their identity is. Are you the guys that put on awesome cards like this, or these crazy ass fights? What are you?
I mean, it almost felt when they were experimenting with, Tito Ortiz and the Stephan Bonner fight that they were using these big fights to bring a lot of eyeballs, and then that will elevate their original product. But then you start wondering, how sustainable is that, and how well is it working? I mean, we've seen a lot of crossovers from the UFC not do too well, and I don't know if they're really exactly bringing up all their...
I know you guys got into that a little bit last week. I mean less than that. I don't exactly mean that. Look, since Scott Coker took over, is Bellator more successful than it was under Bjorn Rebney?
Yeah.
Incontestably. Incontestably, that is true. But the returns from Bellator NYC, you ask them about the pay-per-view returns, and what the people at Spike and Viacom will tell you is, well, we look at it as a total success. So they mean, like, was the gate good? Yes. Was the pay-per-view kind of low? Yes. But my point being is this. I think they've had a number of successes with those old guys, but it didn't really translate on pay-per-view, did it? And so now in fairness, you've got Rory taking on Douglas Lima. Sensational contest. But if you're asking me, like, what is Bellator's identity? heading into the beginning of this year or somewhere in the middle of it, everyone was like, man, they're number 2. They're nipping on the UFC's heels. Jeff, that conversation has completely dried up.
Yeah, they're not nipping on the heels by any means. They're half a lap behind on the track there. But just like we were talking about UFC's fight cards at the end of the year, I was looking at the Bellator ones, and just about every single one had something interesting on it. Not necessarily the depth of a UFC card, but we can't expect that of Bellator. There's always something. They've got some people that can fight, and they're all, going to be out there. They're spreading them amongst the various cards that are happening between now and the end of the year. And so, it's different. As long as they're not asking us to pay for pay-per-view dollars in order to watch, if they're just going to be putting this on a Friday night on Spike, I'll be watching. So, and I imagine that hopefully they'll draw some pretty good ratings.
And I think we got a bit excited, the media and the fans as well. Watching Bellator get these free agents. Oh, they took Ryan Bader and he's ranked in the UFC. Lorenz Larkin, Roy McDonald. So maybe that sort of elevated the conversation that, the Bellator's right behind the UFC, but it's really not. And I think what we're witnessing is sort of a transition period for Bellator. We can agree the product has gotten better. But, it's still behind the UFC by a lot, and I think they're still in the process of transitioning into, a solid number 2.
So let me just end on this one if I can. I promised we'd talk about fights first, and I believe we have done that. I don't know how successfully, but certainly we've tried. But of course, in the wake of, or I should say, heading into UFC 216 fight week, we had the incredibly tragic events there. We're in the exact location where the media tent was, in fact, for Mayweather-McGregor, right across the street from the Luxor, where a deranged person from the 32nd floor of the Mandalay Bay decided to kill at least 59 people and injure and maim 500 more and affect, hundreds and untold thousands of lives. And one of the women who was killed was a Canadian woman who was a single mother of 4. We're talking about a depth of tragedy that is beyond comprehension. I don't really want to get into anything politicized, but I just wanted to see if you guys had a brief comment about it. I'll just say this. I've always kind of joked about Las Vegas as a city. It's not necessarily my favorite city, but today I'm with you, Las Vegas, completely. I don't think it's enough merely to send your hearts and prayers to somebody. I find this to be, frankly, an empty gesture. But if you have enough money to give to something of the certified GoFundMe campaigns, or if you're in there, I've seen so many coaches saying who they're traveling there, they're going to donate blood. This is an incredible thing you can do. If you can help in any way, please do. And I just want to say, I don't ever want to live in a world where what happened on Sunday is normal, because to me, it's not. And if you have any comment, please.
Yeah, I would just say that, those of us that were involved in the fight world have a different perspective maybe than others in the sports world. This is, the fight capital of the world. I have gone out to Vegas and seen fights. I've seen fights in the Mandalay Bay. I've stayed in the Mandalay Bay.
I love the Mandalay Bay.
I have it was very chilling for me to see the view that they were showing of that horrible tragedy, because I've had that same view. I've been in that hotel looking up the Strip. I mean, it's really chilling to think that these kinds of things can happen in our world today. And it's I thought maybe the UFC wasn't even going to fight this weekend. But that is their hometown. They know better than anybody that town relies on tourism and bringing people in there. So I trust that the UFC, which has so many employees, I imagine that at least some of the UFC employees must have been touched by this tragedy. Somebody must either lost somebody or knows somebody who lost somebody. So I'm sure that company is operating with a heavy heart this week, and we're with you.
Yeah, same what you guys said. It's an unfortunate event, and that Monday, Ariel and I usually do a little behind the scenes of the MMA Hour, and we weren't just in the mood. It was a very sad day. Obviously, Vegas is the fight capital of the world. My first UFC event that I covered was UFC 156. It was in Vegas. So it kind of, hits, home a little bit, just because, we are connected to the city. So, it was a horrible event, and, our thoughts and prayers to the families. And I want to give a shout out to Dana White, who donated money.
$1 million. $1
million.
Credit to Joe Rogan for donating the proceeds of his Friday night show, his stand-up show, all to charity. And I think Dana White, a lot of times on the show we bash Dana White, and a lot of times we say critical things of him. He got out there and he said this week, you want to help Las Vegas? Here's how you help Las Vegas. Visit. Get a cab. Rent a hotel room. Buy a dinner. Go see a show. He is absolutely right. I know the events on Sunday were crazy, but generally, I got to tell you, Vegas is a safe place to have a really good time, and they need your support now more than ever. Okay, before we go, very quickly, I have to say again, this episode of the MMA Beat is brought to you by Toyo Tires. Thanks to the folks at Toyo Tires for being a part of this program. What we are going to do now is what we call, I want to call it the beat off, but I got voted out. I don't know what happened, but we're going to call it, what's it called? After the beat?
Something
After
like
the
that.
MMA Beat? Should beat off, much better term. It's going to be at MMA Fighting, the cameraman's dying right here, at MMAfighting.twitter.com. You can go there right now, and you can use the hashtag #TheMMABeat. We're going to select your questions, and we're just going to have a bit of an open Q&A period, if that's okay with you. So, right now, MMAfighting.twitter.com. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you on Twitter right about now.